What is going on, you guys? It's Freedom again, and today this is the second episode of the Freedom Wooten podcast, and today I'm just gonna talk about a bit of the history of my work and just take you down a trip down memory lane, I guess. So let's just start with rambling about my life. I first learned how to play the guitar when I was about, 7 years old. I got my first guitar, and I was 8 years old when I got my first drum set, and I think I was 9 years old when I got my first bass. And all those three things put together, I learned how to play the three basic instruments of a rock band, and then I've been singing pretty much all of my life, so, vocal cords being the fourth instrument. And so that went, that way from that point forward. And, as far as the name Lava Rock goes, as being my artist name on Spotify and everywhere, if you are familiar with my music, you already know that. And that name was just something I, came up with off the fly, and I don't really remember how I came up with the name, really. I was just a kid, and I was like, oh, Lava Rock would be a cool name for my band. And me and my older brother Tucker, were, jamming and everything like that. And I just thought, Lava Rock would be a cool name for a band or some kind of music project or an album. And me and my brother made this album called Lightning Through the Soil. And he was like 7. No, I was 7. I was 7 and he was about 14 or somewhere around there. I think we were a little bit older than that. But in any case, that album is probably never going to see the light of day publicly, just because of it's just kind of cringe. But at the same time, I'm not ashamed of it. It's just not really a point in anybody hearing it, because it's so bad. But at the same time, it's what started Lava Rock, sort of. But Lava Rock sort of really formed itself when I wrote the song Sacrifice, and which was released in 2023, but I originally wrote that song when I was 12 years old. I'm not joking when I say that, nor am I, trying to flex or anything like that. I wrote the basic, sacrifice, 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 and a couple of lines from the verses and stuff like that when I was 12, and I wrote some of the main riffs, kind of, sort of. But yeah, so Sacrifice was written around that time when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I recorded it at a studio called Baker Productions. And Baker Productions is a studio in Coleman, Alabama, which is where I grew up the latter half of my life. The first 10 years of my life, I grew up in Commerce, Georgia, which is a small town connected to Athens, Georgia. And so that was a thing. And in Coleman, I recorded the song Sacrifice on a 1-track deal at Baker Studios for $35. And my mother paid for it, bless her heart, because the song it turned out to be, when I was an adult, released in 2023, turned out to be a legitimate monster. and it scared her to death. And I thought, but she still prefers the version I made when I was a kid. It didn't really scare her. She just, she prefers the first version because it sounds sweeter and more innocent, quote unquote. And I see that from her point of view, but still, the version that is now in all streaming stores is the true version of Sacrifice, the full-length version. I might release the original recording of Sacrifice that I made when I was a kid, 12 years old, one of these days. But right now, it remains in the vault. But yeah, and so moving forward, I didn't write music for a really long time after that because things started to segue faster when I hit high school. I was homeschooled, but there was a lot more work to do and stuff like that. And then I started writing this album when I was about 16 years old. It was called Sorrows of the Sinful. Long story short, let me put it this way. Long story short form, so I don't make this entire podcast about this one album, even though I totally could. Now is not the time. Sorrows of the Sinful was an album that I started writing when I was around 12 years old. It was originally just a song, and I just forgot about it for a long time. And when I was about 15 years old, just a couple of years later, I went through an extremely traumatic relationship that sort of gave me a really toxic God complex. And I found the song after I ended the relationship. I found the song, and immediately it just struck me as like a divine inspiration, and I followed my creative intuition as I always do with everything. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I got it wrong in the way I articulated it, and I ended up screwing up my life in more in ways than I could shake a stick at. And that ended up landing me in a mental institution, psych ward, whatever you want to call it, and realizing that, and after I got out, I was extremely depressed, obviously, and because I worked so hard for years on this album called Sorrows of the Sinful, and it was supposed to be like this grand masterpiece and all these things, and I put out a song, and it had a mixed bag of receptions. I was a singer off the album called Human Kites, and the songwriting was there, but the recording turned out horrible, and everybody heard it. Some people said it was good, but overall, like I said, the songwriting aspects were there, but the recording was not. And whenever I realized that, it was just like, man, I did all of this for nothing. And so, I got on all these antidepressants and stuff like that, and I recorded this album called Proxy Teen in 2022, fast forwarding all the way to being 21 years old, 5 years later, after Sorrows of the Sinful, one big manic episode, and then I hit depression, hence the bipolar disorder I've mentioned in the Perfect Hatred Project, as I mentioned in the podcast about it as well, the first episode. I wrote this album called Proxy Teen, and Proxy Teen, I'll get more into it in a different podcast. I know I said in the first podcast I was going to make an entire episode about it, and I think I'm going to do that for the next podcast whenever I have my ambient project finished, which I still plan on having finished and uploaded by December. And so, this is so back to Proxy Teen. Long story short about that one is, that album is just about depression, and not a lot of positive vibes from that album besides the song Life is Good, I guess. But even then, it's still hard to listen to. The entire album is very hard to listen to, and one person told me that it sounded industrial, which is what I was going for at the time. Honestly, I didn't really realize it though, because I was just recording an acoustic album, and the whole static in the album that you hear. And by the way, Proxy Teen is not on Spotify or anything like that. It is nowhere on there. So, there's that. It's only on YouTube. So just take note of that. If you want to listen to Proxy Teen, you're not going to be able to find it on Spotify or anything like that. It's only on YouTube. So I had it uploaded to Spotify at one point, but it really screwed up the radio station, Lava Rock Radio, which is what's based off of my artist uploading and everything like that. So with that, having it being royally screwed up, it was just I don't want to have a bunch of random singer-songwriter stuff on my account, because that's not the type of art I was going for at the time, the type of music. I was leaning more towards an alternative rap direction, hardcore trap / alternative pop. And so that's why I took it down. But I'll probably re-upload it sometime later down the road. But anyways, so Proxy Teen was really just about depression and stuff like that. And then Perfect Hatred I wrote later, elaborating on the whole Proxy Teen deal and overcoming it, so to speak. But before I put out Perfect Hatred, I re-recorded Sacrifice in 2023, a year after Proxy Teen was released. And that turned out beautifully, really. It was originally supposed to be a thrash metal song, but it ended up kind of being a blackened thrash metal sound just because of how rough the mix was. But in the end, it sounds like the way it was meant to sound. And so there's that. So moving forward, we're I guess I'll talk about the present. So in the present moment, I am working on doing an ambient project. And hold on, let me take a sip of my coffee here. Love my coffee. Yeah, moving forward into the present. I haven't really been doing much. I've been kind of inactive artistically, taking a little break after finishing the craziness that was Perfect Hatred, and I'm trying to move on to the future projects. And what are my future projects? Well, for starters, the album, the ambient project I'm going to release pretty soon is called Doxy Me. And it is sort of a balm for the chaos that was Proxy Teen, which is very, had no peace in it. It was just total depression, hopelessness. There was some hopefulness. There were some hopeful moments in Proxy Teen, but not many. But Doxy Me is really supposed to represent the aftermath of Perfect Hatred and coming to the resolution of, like, I don't want to let go, and I'm gonna stay alive. And so Doxy Me is about reprocessing the whole thing, and that is a representative of a type of therapy I'm in right now called EMDR. And you're gonna hear a lot of that kind of reprocessing of, like, following somebody's fingers and stuff like that, moving them left to right and left to right, following the fingers with your eyes. And this project is going to be a representation of that, the whole reprocessing aspect of things. And what I mean by that is it'll be very calming and meditative, but you'll also hear stuff like panning left to right. And so that's going to be really neat. And so that's one thing I'm really excited about. But also, besides Doxy Me, which is something I'm really excited about, by the way. Actually, before I move forward, let me elaborate on the title, Doxy Me. Doxy Me is the name of the website that I use for therapy. And I always wondered, what does Doxy mean? And I looked up the meaning, and it has two meanings. And it's really, really ironic. Really, really ironic. It has a good meaning and a bad meaning. One meaning, the good meaning, is a medicine to treat STDs. But the opposite meaning of doxy is a medieval term for a prostitute. And when I read that, my mind was blown. I was just like, what in the world? Like, why is the website named after that? It was just, they probably picked it as just like a random word or something, but yeah, I picked it as a representation of that, the duality between, like, medicine and a prostitute, because a lot of times pornography, which was something I used to be addicted to, is often viewed by many as a type of medicine or a type of therapy, and then there's, like, the actual medicine, Doxycontin. I don't know what the full term is, but it's something like that, some kind of medication term. And I thought it was really funny, you know? And so I was just like, well, considering that the whole EMDR therapy that I got was for traumatic sexual experiences and reprocessing them in my memory and my mind and everything, you know, this title really fits. But considering, like I said before, it's the counterpart to Proxetine, I picked it like that because, you know, Proxetine, as anybody that listens to it can tell, it's about unprocessed trauma. Doxy-Me is about reprocessing the trauma, as well as Perfect Hatred being about unprocessed trauma as well. And Doxy-Me is about reprocessing it. And when it comes to that, you know, like I said, it's an ambient project. I'm trying not to say as much. And I think I'm doing it better than I did even last time, getting more used to it. But Doxy-Me, like I said, is an ambient project, and when it comes to ambient projects, the music is structureless. So keep that in mind, because the whole aspect of the structureless concept makes way for the reprocessing, because when it comes to reprocessing, there's no beat to it. It just moves around, and it circles around in your mind and moves back and forth, and it's just a headspace. It's not, a solid beat that you can just nod your head to, And with that in mind, or at least that's the way it was for me. So I am making this Doxy-Me project as a representative of that, but also the fact that Doxy-Me rhymes with Proxetine is a whole another reason, an additional reason for the title, So stay tuned for that. That's what is presently cooking. So let's talk about the future. The future of my creative process and Freedom Productions and Lava Rock and my life and everything. So in the future, I'm going into my senior year, that being the spring semester upcoming and the fall semester. And after the fall, I'll be completely graduated from college, and I'll probably continue going to college, getting my bachelor's degree. So there's that as well. But then there's the whole sorry, I need to get another drink of coffee. Goodness. All right. So where was I? The future, yes. So I'll be graduated with a bachelor's degree, and I'll probably stay here to get my master's degree. That's what I meant earlier. Oh goodness, it's been kind of a long day. I'm kind of tired. Hence the coffee. I'm sitting here in my car, and I'm drinking coffee out of a non-portable coffee cup. It's just a regular coffee mug, because I'm awesome like that. Oh boy, I'm not that good with sarcasm, but I still try. But yeah, so other things as far as creatively moving into the future for Lava Rock, my music project, is the next album following Doxy Me, as well as Perfect Hatred, and that album is going to be Perfect Love. And if you're a friend of mine, like if I've talked to you personally and everything, you already know what's up. I've told a lot of people about it, and Perfect Love is going to basically be a direct part 2 to Perfect Hatred, and it's instead of Perfect Hatred, whereas it was very hateful and aggressive and chaotic and manic and depressing and slow and fast and hard and soft and everything in between. There was that, and that was what Perfect Hatred was, as I described in the previous podcast. But Perfect Love is going to be about love, and it's of course, and hence the title. But elaborating on that, the whole perfect love is representing God's perfect love and everything like that. And let me just stop there. So before I move forward talking about the concept of this album, I want to make one thing clear that I didn't make clear in the Perfect Hatred podcast, the first episode, is that I do not consider myself a Christian artist, even though I do consider myself a Christian, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like, the idea of labeling myself as a Christian plumber, as one of my favorite rappers, NF, once put it, Like, why call myself a Christian artist or a musician more than somebody would call themselves a Christian plumber, If you can fix my toilet, just come over. I don't, no one cares what you believe in. And I want to say that's the kind of area that I stay in, because I'm the type of person where I fight, I'm always going to fight for what I believe in, but in no way, under any circumstance, I'm going to insist in people's faces that I'm right. Because everybody's trying to figure stuff out. No one's got everything 100% right. We're all humans, and we're all just trying to figure it out. Of course, there are basic, cause and effect acts. If you drop a basketball onto the ground, it's going to bounce if it's full of enough air. If you strum a G chord on a guitar, it's going to play the G chord if it's tuned right. And and everything like that. And so that's one thing that I want to make clear. But anyways, moving on, I also have a movie that I plan on making, and it's called The Detective. And after I make the Proxy Teen and Doxy Me podcast, which will be after Doxy Me is released, I'm going to make a podcast about The Detective movie. And that is going to be a whole nother trip in and of itself, and I'm very, very excited for what that will bring to the table. But I'm also excited about Perfect Love and Doxy Me. And I'm also excited and thankful for the numbers I have gotten as far as listeners of what I've already released. I've gotten like 500,000 listens on the deluxe edition of Perfect Hatred, and I think that is absolutely phenomenal. And I can't wait to see what comes forth in the future. So, anyways, this has been Freedom Wooten with the Freedom Wooten podcast. Gosh, I'm probably going to stop saying that from this point forward, because that just kind of I don't know. Makes me feel weird, personally. But yes, this is the end of this episode of the podcast, and I hope y'all have learned something if you're listening and you had a good time listening. And anyways, that's it. Oh, one more thing. I hope y'all have a merry Christmas. So, there's also that. So, anyways, freedom out.